Two men. Same age. Same city. Same $80,000 salary. Same $70,000 sitting in the bank. One of them buys a house. The other one keeps writing a rent check every month and quietly invests the rest. 20 years later, one of them owns a home worth more than $500,000. The other one has built a portfolio that quietly outgrew that house, and almost nobody saw it coming, including him. Here is what is wrong with every rent versus buy argument you have ever watched. The buying side starts at the finish line. They show you what a house is worth in 20 years and call that a victory. The renting side waves around words like freedom and flexibility and pretends those words come with no price tag. Neither side counts everything. This one counts everything. The mortgage interest that swallows your first year almost whole. The closing costs nobody warns you about until you are sitting at the table with a pen in your hand. The property taxes that climb right alongside your home's value. The maintenance budget that never shows up on a real estate channel's thumbnail. And the number that almost never gets calculated honestly. What actually happens if the renter invests every dollar he is not handing to a mortgage every single month for 20 years? By the end of this, you will know the real break-even point between buying and renting in a normal market. You will know why the phrase throwing money away on rent is more of a slogan than it is math. And you will know exactly which situation makes buying the obvious move and which one makes renting the smarter play. If that is the version you have been looking for, subscribe and turn on the bell before we start. This channel runs the real math on the decisions that follow you for decades. Now let me show you the numbers. Meet Daniel and Andre. Both are 32 years old. Both earn $80,000 a year. Both have $70,000 saved. They rent in the same mid-sized city, and a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a decent neighborhood there is listed at $350,000. This is the fork in the road. Same starting point, two completely different paths. Daniel buys it. He puts the entire $70,000 down. That is exactly 20%, which lets him skip private mortgage insurance. He takes a 30-year loan at 6.5%, right about where the average 30-year fixed rate sits today. His principal and interest come to about $1,770 a month. Then he adds the parts people conveniently forget. Property taxes of about $350 a month. Homeowner's insurance of about $150. And $290 a month set aside for maintenance, roughly 1% of the home's value a year, the bare minimum any honest planner will tell you to budget. Add it up, and Daniel's true cost to own this home is about $2,560 a month. Andre does the opposite. He calls his landlord and signs another lease. He rents a nearly identical 3-bedroom in the same area for $2,000 a month. Then he takes the $70,000 he did not bury in a down payment and puts it into a total stock market index fund. And every month, he invests the $560 difference between what Daniel pays to own and what he pays to rent. On paper, Andre looks like he found a cheat code. Same kind of home, $560 cheaper every single month, and his capital is still in the market, compounding. Here is the part almost nobody says out loud. The moment Daniel signs at closing, he is not ahead. He is behind. And not by a little. Closing costs on a $350,000 home usually run somewhere between 2 and 5% of the purchase price. Lender fees. Title insurance. Prepaid property taxes. Setting up the escrow account. So Daniel did not really spend $70,000 to get into this house. His real day one cost is closer to $77,000, even $87,000. That gap has to be earned back before owning even begins to beat renting. The industry does not put that number on a billboard because it makes the first year look rough. But it is real, it is standard, and it comes due at the table. This is where the buying side quietly cheats the story. They talk about building equity from day one. What they leave out is that in year one of a 30-year loan, almost your entire payment is interest, not equity. Of Daniel's $1,770 payment, about $1,517 goes straight to the lender as interest in the very first month. Only about $253 actually shrinks the loan. So look closely at where Daniel's money goes that first year. About $1,517 in interest, $350 in taxes, $150 in insurance, $290 set aside for maintenance. That is roughly $2,307 a month walking out the door with no equity attached to any of it. The $253 in principal is the only part of his payment doing what people imagine the whole payment is doing. Andre, meanwhile, hands over $2,000 in rent and nothing else. The phrase throwing money away on rent survives because it sounds true. But in year one, Daniel is throwing away more money on costs that build nothing than Andre is throwing away on rent. Now let's run it out to year three, where the fantasy starts meeting the spreadsheet. Over 3 years, Daniel pays about $92,000 in total housing costs, and that is on top of the roughly $12,000 he already spent just to close. Of that, only about $10,000 went toward owning more of the house. His loan balance is down to around $270,000. If the home appreciated at 3 to 4% a year, it is now worth somewhere between $382,000 and $394,000, which puts his equity between about $112,000 and $124,000. That is real wealth, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But it is locked inside the walls of a house he cannot sell without paying to get out. Somewhere in those 3 years, he replaced a failing water heater and patched a crack that ate a weekend and a few $100s in materials. Both came out of the maintenance budget. He handled them. But those bills do not stop coming. They just wait their turn. Andre spent $72,000 on rent over the same 3 years, and he is not getting a cent of it back. But his $70,000 investment grew to about $93,000 at historical market returns, and his monthly contributions added another $23,000 or so. Andre's total invested wealth is about $116,000. And unlike Daniel's equity, he can turn it into cash on any business day of the week. At year 3, this race is basically a tie, except one side of it is liquid and the other is poured into concrete. If this is already showing you the parts of the debate that usually get skipped, a quick like helps more people find it. Back to the numbers. Let's talk about the costs that almost never make it into a buying pitch. The ones on the way out. When Daniel eventually sells this house, he has to pay to leave it. Agent commissions used to be a near automatic 5 to 6% that sellers were basically pressured to cover. Since the 2024 industry settlement, those fees are openly negotiable. But in practice, a full sale still tends to cost around 5% of the price once you add both sides together. On a $500,000 home, that is roughly $25,000 gone as he walks out the door. Stack that on top of what he paid going in, and the round trip of buying and then selling often eats 8 to 10% of the home's value. That is the hurdle appreciation has to clear before the house has truly made him a dime. Property taxes are the next quiet climber. Daniel's $350 a month is based on a $350,000 house. The day that house is worth $500,000, the tax bill climbs to match it. His mortgage payment is frozen for 30 years, which is a genuine advantage, but his total housing cost still drifts upward over time as the assessment rises. Andre's rent goes up too. The difference is that Andre's landlord absorbs the property tax risk, not Andre. And maintenance is not optional, and it is not always a tidy $290 a month. The good years look like a little caulk, a few light bulbs, and a furnace filter. The bad years look like a $9,000 roof, a $7,500 heating and cooling system, or a $4,000 foundation repair. Spread across a long enough timeline, these are not really risks. They are appointments you simply have not scheduled yet. A homeowner who does not quietly set that money aside is not saving money. He is borrowing time against a bill whose due date never gets announced in advance. Then there is the number that almost never appears in a homeownership pitch at all. Opportunity cost. The $70,000 Daniel wired to closing left the market the instant it landed in the seller's account. At a 10% average annual return, which is roughly what the broad American stock market has delivered over the long run, that same $70,000 would have grown to about $471,000 over 20 years. Now, that is not money Daniel lost. It is the path he traded away in exchange for home equity and a fixed payment. The comparison is only honest when you put both of those paths on the table at the same time. Year 10 and Year 20 are where it gets genuinely interesting for both teams. Make sure you are subscribed because there is a follow-up coming where I model what happens when you run both strategies at once. By Year 10, Daniel's home is worth somewhere between $470,000 and $518,000. His loan balance has fallen to about $237,000, which puts his equity somewhere between roughly $233,000 and $281,000. He has also spent tens of thousands of dollars on repairs, replacements, and small upgrades across that decade, money that came back out of the wealth he was building. Andre has been fully invested the entire time. His original $70,000 has grown to about $181,000 all on its own. His monthly contributions, which started at $560 but shrank each year as his rent crept up, added roughly another $90,000. That puts Andre's portfolio at around $270,000 by Year 10. Still neck and neck. Still completely liquid. But something important has shifted underneath the surface. By Year 10, Andre's rent has climbed to around $2,610 a month. He is now paying almost exactly what Daniel pays, except nothing is building underneath him. And here is the quiet magic of Daniel's situation. His core mortgage payment has not moved $1 in 10 years, and it will not move for 20 more. Andre's rent has no such promise. It only goes one direction. By Year 20, the gap between these two men is wide, and the story has fully turned. Daniel's home is worth somewhere around $700,000. His loan balance has dropped to about $156,000, so his equity now sits somewhere between roughly $476,000 and $611,000. And that core mortgage payment is still anchored to the same $1,770 figure he locked in 2 decades earlier, while everything else in his life got more expensive. Andre, if he held through every crash without flinching and kept investing the difference exactly as planned, has a portfolio worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $650,000 to $700,000. So let me say the thing the buying crowd will never say. On paper, the disciplined renter is actually ahead at Year 20. Read that twice. But look hard at the assumption holding it up. Every dollar of that gap, invested every single month, through every downturn for 20 straight years. That is the whole game. And even sitting slightly behind on paper, Daniel has something Andre simply does not. In 10 more years, his mortgage ends. Andre's rent never does. At Year 30, that difference becomes the whole story. Daniel owns the home outright. It is worth somewhere between $850,000 and north of $1 million, and he owes nothing on it. His monthly housing cost collapses to just taxes, insurance, and upkeep. Call it roughly $1,800 to $2,200 a month on a home that size, with no mortgage stacked on top. Andre at Year 30 is still writing a rent check, and by now that check is somewhere around $4,700 to $5,000 a month. His portfolio is large, possibly over $1 million if he never touched it. But there is no end date on his rent, no ceiling above it, and no floor underneath his cost of living. That is the piece the renting math always quietly underplays. Now here is the single thing that changes the renting math more than anything else on this list. The rent and invest strategy works, and it works beautifully, but only if you actually invest the difference. Every month. Including the months when the market drops 30% and every instinct says to pull it all into cash and wait. Every analysis that shows renting winning is built on that one quiet assumption that the renter invests every dollar of the gap with something close to perfect discipline for decades. And the data on whether real people actually do this is not encouraging. Most of us spend the difference. We upgrade the apartment. We take the trip we earned. We let our lifestyle rise to meet the balance in the account. A mortgage, for all its flaws and all its interest, forces the saving automatically, every month, whether you feel disciplined or not. That forced discipline shows up nowhere on a spreadsheet, and it is the single biggest reason homeownership builds more wealth for the average person than the theoretical math predicts. But let me be exactly as honest about the buying side, because the people who skip this part are the ones selling you the fairy tale. The break-even point is slower than most buyers expect. Once you count the costs going in, the costs going out, and those brutal interest-heavy early years, buying usually does not pull ahead of renting and investing until somewhere around year 5 to 7 in a normal market. Buy a house, then sell it 3 years later, and there is a very real chance you came out behind where you would have been just renting. Mobility has a price, and owning makes that price steep. Concentration risk is real and badly underrated. Ask anyone who owned in a market that fell 30%. You cannot rebalance a house the way you rebalance a portfolio. Andre's money is spread across thousands of companies in dozens of industries. Daniel's entire net worth is one building, on one street, in one zip code. And liquidity matters more than people think, right up until the moment they need it. Daniel cannot sell 5% of his kitchen to cover a medical bill. Andre can sell 5% of his portfolio before lunch. So here is the honest answer, and it is not the same answer for everyone. Buying wins clearly when a few things are true. If you plan to stay put for at least 7 to 10 years, those transaction costs stop being a drag, and that fixed payment slowly turns into a quiet superpower. If the price-to-rent ratio in your area, which is just the home price divided by a full year of rent for a similar place, is under about 15, buying tends to pencil out in your favor. And if your rent is already close to what owning the same place would cost you, the financial case for renting gets weaker every single year. Renting wins clearly in the opposite situations. If there is a real chance you move in the next 3 to 5 years, the transaction costs alone will likely leave you behind. If your local price-to-rent ratio is above about 21, renting and faithfully investing the difference will often beat buying even over long horizons. If you are in a career stage where moving means bigger paychecks, that flexibility carries real value that never shows up on a spreadsheet. And if you genuinely have the discipline the renting strategy demands, investing every month and holding through every crash without blinking, then the math is quietly on your side. And here is the question that quietly cracks this entire debate wide open. What if you did not have to choose at all? What if you bought a small 2-unit place, lived in one half, rented out the other, and let a tenant cover most of your mortgage while you kept right on investing on the side? Or simply bought in a stable market and refused to stop your monthly contributions? Combining both strategies is a completely different conversation, and it changes almost every number we just walked through. That is the follow-up video, so subscribe now if you want me to run that math next. But before you go anywhere, understand this. The most important question in this entire decision is not which option wins on average across the country. It is 2 questions, and both of them are about you specifically. How long are you actually going to stay? And if you rent, are you honestly going to invest the difference? Everything else flows out of those 2 answers. The math, the comparison, that dramatic year 20 outcome, all of it depends entirely on what you actually do, not on what you tell yourself you plan to do. So go back to those 2 men from the very beginning. Same age, same city, same $70,000 in the bank. The one who came out ahead was not the one who chose renting, and it was not the one who chose buying. It was the one who picked a lane and then actually did the boring, unglamorous thing inside it, month after month, for 20 years without quitting. That is the whole secret. And it is the exact part no thumbnail will ever try to sell you. If this gave you a clearer picture of renting versus buying when you run all of it, not just the equity, not just the freedom, but the entire equation, hit like before you go. It honestly helps this reach more people. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns that run the real math with no agenda. And then tell me down in the comments. Are you team rent, team buy, or somewhere in the middle? I read every single one. I will see you in the next one.